Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge Bill McCraw. Bill, would you stand for a moment, please? Bill is my friend, mentor, and one of the university's most gifted teachers. Bill, please accept my deepest gratitude for all the warmth and guidance you have shown me. Now, would all of you join me in thanking Bill for over 50 years of outstanding teaching at San Jose State University. This is a joyous occasion for students, but also for faculty. Most of us draw strength from you. Faculty like to bask in the afterglow of student success. That is why I was so deeply touched to share my award with your awards. I value my teaching and my relationships with students above all else, and so this is the proudest moment of my professional life. Awards, I have discovered, always carry a responsibility. My responsibility tonight is to teach you something valuable in the scant minutes that I have been given. What I'm going to try to teach you is that in receiving your honors tonight, you are also receiving an important responsibility. Many of my students know my background, with associations at several of the nation's most prestigious universities. I won't say anything to disrespect those institutions, except their choice of colors. Their generous financial aid made it possible for me, the child of a poorly paid teacher, to receive one of the best educations possible in America and to graduate with a doctorate, debt-free. But living in the environment of America's most elite universities taught me a few things. It showed me how higher education should be conducted, given ample resources, and given students who had suffered few disadvantages in life. It also gave me a window into the values and lifestyles of America's most privileged families. My first teaching assignment was as a graduate student at Princeton. In my preceptorial, I had the daughter of a United States Senator. Elsewhere in the class, we had a student whose name was synonymous with a Fortune 500 company. And elsewhere, the most famous teenage actress of the day. I loved my students there as I loved them here. I relished the intellectual exchange that was always available in those settings. Several years later, in my first class at San Jose State, I had an epiphany. While many of my students lived nearby, Silicon Valley was little more than a dream to them. In my very first class, I had a homeless student. He pitched his tent in the backyards of friends. Decades later, San Jose State continues to draw from among the modest and the poor. The 2014 survey showed that 39% of you have skipped meals because you did not have money for food. So the arc of my career has taken me from teaching the nation's elites to teaching students who sometimes go hungry. I have never regretted my move. The life experiences of my San Jose State students have proven to be a surprising advantage when studying political theory. There was one student who survived Pol Pot's killing fields and explained how his experience made him appreciate what Hobbes meant by the war of all against all. There was a retired Black Baptist minister who raised his hand during my Martin Luther King lecture and explained what it was really like to march with the Reverend. There was a field worker who related to Marx's theory of alienated labor and described the work that broke her body, but not her mind. Political theory was no abstraction to these students. They each knew that political theory was ultimately about power, the power that had made their lives miserable, and the power to change things for the better. Despite these surprising advantages, I could not entirely look away from the differences between my old students and the new ones. I was prepared to deal with a lack of economic and social advantages experienced by my students here, but there was one form of quiet bigotry that I was not initially prepared to face. This was the bigotry of low expectations. When I first arrived, the most common question I fielded from my students was, "Why are you here?" Meaning, "Why aren't you teaching at one of those elite institutions?" It was as if they found it abnormal that someone with my background would take an interest in them. Well, there is a simple answer to their question, and here it is. I am here because you deserve the same quality and kind of education as my Stanford and Princeton students receive. Do not let the tyranny of low expectations say otherwise. But behind the simple answer, there is a more complicated one. The tyranny of low expectations is fed by very large forces in history that have sought to discount you. Those forces have for a long time said that students who come from modest and working class backgrounds should receive a different style of education than other students. Such students should have a practical education and not a liberal or well-rounded education. They should be taught how to get a productive job and not have their heads filled, in the words of Booker T. Washington, with a divine discontent about social injustices that they could never hope to change. Even the tiered system of higher education here in California perpetuates that prejudice. The founder of the California Master Plan for Higher Education once remarked that UC was to educate the future leaders of California, while the CSU was to train the future workers. And sadly, the resources that have flowed to our university have reflected the elitism spelled out in that divisive statement. What do I mean when I say I want to bring an elite education to students who do not usually come from elite backgrounds? I don't mean checking GE boxes or some laundry list of learning objectives. I mean taking students who come to us seeing the world in one way and helping you to acquire the ability to see it in many ways. There are many great teaching techniques. Here is how I do it. I skip textbooks and I have my students read original texts. We read the classics from Plato to Machiavelli. We read their critics from de Beauvoir to Du Bois. We read Thomas Jefferson, and we read Frederick Douglass, and we read Chief Joseph. As we read these texts, my students grapple with the contradictions, hypocrisies, and arguments they see exposed. Each time they read one of those texts, my students must look at the world through someone else's eyes. Some of those authors lived long ago, were far away, or had unfamiliar cultures, philosophies, religions, values. Adam Smith, who was at least as good a moral philosopher as he was an economist, taught that all morality depends upon imagination. The imagination to sympathize with someone who has a different outlook from you. This theory of moral sentiment, the ability to inhabit a different point of view, is the epitome of a liberal education. If more Americans had that quality, we would live in a land of much greater tolerance, moderation, and civic virtue. There is also power in a liberal education, as was magnificently pointed out by the great civil rights leader W.B. Du Bois. At the turn of the 20th century, Du Bois was embroiled in a heated debate over what kind of education was best for lifting the children and grandchildren of former slaves out of oppression. The prevailing view was to supply them a little more than job training, if that. But Du Bois insisted that a strong liberal education was essential in order to prepare the change agents who would battle segregation and racism. Since resources were limited at that time, Du Bois sought to assure that at least the most talented tenth of African Americans received this liberal education, with the hope that they would pay it back by lifting others who came after them. Students, none of you are the children or grandchildren of slaves, but every one of you is a member of our talented tenth. You have earned that distinction as an honors student. Your talents are not only exhibited in your academic success, but are profound when viewed in light of the struggles you have overcome. Becoming our talented tenth, when many of you are first-generation college students, when most of you work more than half-time, when many of you have family obligations, when most of you come from public schools with inadequate resources, you are remarkably talented, and you have proven this by being in this room tonight. But with great talent comes great responsibility. Your talent must not be wasted. Each of you should leave San Jose State with the kind of education you will need to fight for greater fairness and equality than this world has yet seen fit to offer. You need the lessons of history and politics and literature and science and art and culture, so you know your place in this world and how to access the levers of power to change it. Can your generation assure that future students have even greater opportunities than you have had? Why shouldn't the San Jose State of 2030 graduate 90% of its students in 4 years? Why shouldn't they graduate from this university debt-free? Why shouldn't they attend seminars of 15 students where the professor challenges each student by name? Why shouldn't they expect to be taught by the best and the brightest and never even think to ask their professor, "Why are you here?" If you help to bring this about, then your talented tenth can bring the talented half and then the talented whole. Is this a utopian dream? No, I have lived this dream. And the only thing that keeps it from being a reality here are inadequate resources and insufficient imagination. You need to become the generation that supplies more of both. I charge you to become the leaders who will bring genuine equality of opportunity to American higher education. You are bright, broadly educated, and well-disciplined. You have likely experienced some hardships. Let those light a fire within. You need to be our talented tenth. My dear students, I truly love you. Congratulations on your splendid honors and on the assumption of your responsibilities.